Hey everyone, so Dr. Im is out today, so he asked me to do the intro. So today we have Dr. Branch, who's a leader in Hep C research, talking about where we're at today in 2018 with Hep C and where we go from here. So, Branch.
So I always enjoy giving this lecture. Since I don't get to see our fellows in the clinic, it's just kind of a nice way for me to get a chance to share thoughts that are on our minds. So this is a beautiful field of wheat, and in thinking about it, in the situation that we face with hepatitis C and the questions that remain, it seems to me it's just like fertile ground laid out in front of us, where there are just an infinitude of questions. And one of the things about hepatitis C is that it's really the first liver disease where we can at least halt the proximal cause of the disease, and probably it will be among the first diseases where there's really good research in the resolution of fibrosis and repair of liver, which is going to be just important for the entire field of hepatology as more and more patients with various liver diseases progress to liver cirrhosis. This is my disclosure. Mount Sinai gets funds from Gilead to support two studies, one impact of hepatitis C on quality of life, and the other on eliminating Hep C. So I direct these projects in collaboration with Punny and Doug. Allison's in blue. She's just an instrumental force in these studies. We just would have a terrible time without her. Amreen, Amon, Mark, Shirley. Max, I don't know if Max is here, but he's a new medical informaticist who's joined the team, along with Lily, and Brooke helps us out on the stats. Anna is here. She's the coordinator on a interdigitating project, all aimed at identifying patients with hepatitis C and getting them cured. So recently, there was a study in hepatology that talked about how we might eliminate hepatitis C in the United States. And one of the things that the authors focused on, and you'll see this as kind of a factor that turns up in several issues about hepatitis C, the whole field has been just tremendously underfunded. So these guys hunted down the actual statistics and found that for each case of hepatitis C, there's $36 of NIH funding annually, whereas for each case of HIV, it's $3,000. So this is just a huge obstacle to overcome when you're really trying to understand anything. And what the authors write is, this discrepancy is partly because HIV mostly affects men who have sex with men, who can advocate for themselves, whereas hepatitis C mostly affects intravenous drug users who may more likely end up in prisons and are unable to rally public support. Therefore, healthcare providers and social activists must intensify efforts to advocate for hepatitis C elimination. So these are the questions I want to talk about today. Who has hepatitis C in the United States? What institutional and societal factors make it difficult to get robust data about hepatitis C epidemiology? What integrated pathogenic networks kill people with hepatitis C? How does hepatitis C cure impact these pathways? And can research reveal ways to stimulate liver regeneration in the end-stage liver without triggering liver cancer? So the data on hepatitis C epidemiology is fragmented, out of date, and very difficult to interpret. There are various sources of information. So one of the sources that we all turn to is the New York State Department of Health, and they have put out data that looks something like this. So if you look at 2005, you can see a unimodal distribution with a peak age of about 50. It's really this which typifies the baby boomer distribution. And in 2016, you can see that the peak has moved up from about 50 to 60 because people have gotten older. And the number of cases has gone down tremendously. So I just want to call your attention. One thing the authors have done here is they've actually changed the y-axis, which makes it a little hard to compare the different graphs. And there's a new peak. In younger people, oops. So we weren't quite sure what we were looking at when it says total hepatitis C by age and sex. But in order to interpret this data, it depends on knowing the meaning of what total is. So we asked, and it's just newly reported cases. So you might think that you're looking at data that is the combination of prevalent cases and new cases, but no, it's just the new cases. So that image of hepatitis C moving out of the baby boomers and into young people, that's not really a good concept to have about what's happening. So this is a slide that shows around the state of New York the newly reported cases over time. And you can see there was a peak at about 2006, and now at 2014 we're somewhat lower. And you can kind of see how the cases have moved out of New York City and into other parts of New York State. So the CDC has made an effort to keep on top of the hepatitis C epidemiology, and on their website they explain all the reasons why various places to look for information don't work very well because they're unreliable. And so they have some sentinel counties that they try to keep track of and monitor hepatitis C. And based on these sentinel counties, they try to then extrapolate to national data about the number of new cases of hepatitis C. And this is their estimate that in about from 2005 to 2016, the number of new cases of hepatitis C have about doubled from around 20,000 to 40,000.
And the same sentinel counties they use for NHANES?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're largely rural.
They have some urban places. As I say, I think one thing everybody can agree on is that the epidemiology in hepatitis C is terrible. It's really no basis for making public policy because we truly don't know what the profile of the epidemic looks like. This puts what's happening currently in some kind of historical perspective. So that back in the 1980s, there were up to 300,000 new cases of hepatitis C, and now we're down to about 40,000. So it's this tremendous amount of hepatitis C infection that happened during the 1980s that really gave rise to the baby boomer cohort that we're familiar with. So the sentinel counties are really focused on collecting data about acute hepatitis C. They sort of overlap and complement other sites that are investigated as part of this ongoing National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey called NHANES. NHANES has flaws, but I think it is by far our best national data about the health of the United States. So if you aren't familiar with NHANES, I highly recommend that you become familiar with it. So it's been going on since the 60s. It collects data on 5,000 persons a year. And I actually think this is the biggest problem with NHANES, not the fact that they don't pick their sites well, but it's very difficult to get national data when you're only collecting data on 5,000 people every year. They do collect a lot of data, but one of the problems for our population is that they don't include people who are in prisons or homeless. So it definitely is a selected population. But at least they use consistent data so you can compare their results from year to year. And these are different diseases that they collect information about. And they do it in these cool mobile bands. So the latest poll,
Double wide.
yes, of NHANES data is from 2010 to 2014. They have information on over 8,000 people that they tested for Hep C RNA, and they only found 67 people who were positive. So based on this and their weighted sample, they extrapolate to there being 1.7 million people living in households with hepatitis C. There's a high prevalence in blacks, veterans, people in poverty, and people without insurance. And we also know it has a very high prevalence in prisons and in some populations that are homeless. So it's difficult to take this information and figure out the total number. But I was kind of disturbed by the number that I saw, and it recalled earlier NHANES data from the previous data poll, which already showed that there was a big decrease in the population of 500,000 people disappearing from the United States between 2010 and 2010. So then this new data shows that we've lost another 1 million. So if these people have died, it really indicates that hepatitis C patients are dying at a truly frightful pace. So I did a kind of a back of the envelope calculation where I just took the deaths and divided it by the years. And if you do that, it comes out to 107,000 people who are disappearing from our population annually. So if that is correct, that would put deaths from hepatitis C somewhere between the deaths from Alzheimer's disease and diabetes. And hepatitis C is normally said to kill 20,000 people every year. So I thought, well, this is kind of crazy. So I started asking, could we really be losing all these people every year? And nobody has noticed. But
so for the NHANES, are they following the same cohort of individuals
through
these times? So then how could you say they're losing? They're polling different.
As I say, it's a consistent sampling procedure, and they have this sample, and they say they have a certain number. And then they go and they sample again, and they say it's another number. But hold that thought, because I agree with you. It seemed crazy, absolutely crazy. So I eventually found somebody at the CDC to talk to about this problem. And surprisingly, he said, yeah, he agrees with NHANES, he agrees with the number, so he did not feel that the loss of people reflected a sampling problem or anything like that. And he goes on to comment on his own data, where they had a cohort of people with hepatitis C that they followed, and when these people died, they then looked at their death certificates, and they found that hepatitis C was only mentioned in the death certificate 1/5 of the time. So he reasoned that if hepatitis C nationally is reported to cause 20,000 deaths, and it's underreported by a factor of 5, Scott's words, we think this indicates over 100,000 HCV-infected people are dying per year. So it's really very similar to what I came up with calculating from NHANES data.
And when you say that there are 100,000 people with hepatitis C dying, then this means that there are people dying with Hep C or due to Hep C?
That's an interesting question that the CDC got into in this study that they did, where they pull out the death records and they look at what people were dying from. And here are the people who died. They were mostly 45 to 59, mostly male, white, low income. 20% had Hep C listed as an underlying cause of death. Even among people who died of liver cancer, only 32 had HCV as an underlying cause. Among the But they did notice liver disease in 63%, and the FIB-4 score indicated liver disease in 76%. So they concluded that the majority died not only with, but possibly from HCV, based on this evidence.
So death certificate, because we probably never filled out a death certificate, but it's, a lot of us have. And it's frequently difficult because you're doing it with the undertaker, and you write out what you think is going on, and they go, no, here, I'll give you another one, that's not going to work.
We don't call that with certain diagnoses as a cause of death.
Right.
That can't be the first thing, because if it is, then it triggers like further like autopsy and all sorts of.
Right, then I want to go to the medical examiner, et cetera, et
So
cetera.
they direct you as.
Okay, so this coming up question is going to be for Jim, so get ready. So here we have liver-related non-alcohol listed as a cause of death. And what's remarkable, liver-related non-alcohol, still 2/3 of the time, hepatitis C was not listed. Now, Jim, what do you think these deaths were attributed to?
Liver disease.
If somebody just went through medical records and they just found liver disease not alcohol related and no indication of viral hepatitis,
Probably said cryptogenic cirrhosis or fatty liver disease.
or NASH, yeah, say it out loud, NASH, yeah. So these are probably getting counted in our NASH statistics. You'll notice that Hep C was noted in a minority of the patients who died with HCC. If the patient had HIV, it essentially eliminated Hep C being mentioned at all. And one thing that was interesting to me was this high amount of cardiovascular death compared to non-liver malignancies. I'll come back to that.
Some of the HCC issue is, you got to think about it. So did this guy die of his HCC, and his Hep C was cured 3 years ago?
Well, these data wouldn't have a whole lot of people cured because they're from 2014. I think that's going to become a really, really interesting question in the future, and hopefully we will be at the forefront of
the way the death certificates are written. It's like cause of, initial cause of death due to or caused by, and then due to or caused by. It's like there's usually 3 or 4 boxes.
Yeah.
You can fill out, so you can always throw in Hep C at the bottom.
I think it's a really interesting issue for the circulatory one, particularly because a lot of our patients die from shock.
Yes.
And that gets listed as like a cardiac issue.
Right.
Instead of being related to the condition itself.
Yeah, I think much more needs to be done to find out what Hep C patients are really dying from.
Yeah, it's sepsis, right? Liver disease.
Yeah.
Most of them die from sepsis, and so it's like, and the undertaker is very happy if you write down cardiopulmonary arrest.
Yes, exactly.
So, turning to other sources of information, we have this study coming out in Gastro that's talking about changes in the prevalence of these various things that are liver diseases. And for their data, they turned to a database of commercially insured patients, which of course is going to systematically undercount hepatitis C patients because they typically do not have commercial insurance. So then they're going through, now in order to be considered to have hepatitis C or alcoholic liver disease, you had to have a positive selection criteria. But in order to be considered NASH, all you had to have was sort of none of the above plus just one of these characteristics. And you'll notice hypertension. So if you had hypertension, you qualified for having NASH in this study. So what did they find? Well, this is what they found. And this was my special slide that I made just for Gene, but he's not here. Because last week, Gene was trying to explain to everybody how alcoholic liver disease is really underappreciated. And this slide partially explains how that comes about. So what they did was to take hepatitis C and alcoholic liver disease and split it off into a third category so that it neither counts with hepatitis C nor alcoholic liver disease. If they had counted it in alcohol, then alcohol would have been up above NASH. And I also noticed they broke the y-axis, which causes the diseases to appear much closer together
There's a
than
lot of
they.
NASH that gets confused with alcohol, it's, or else it's BASH.
Yeah.
As we call both alcohol, it's like.
My point is, if you take one disease category like NASH, and you present everybody in that as one, and you take another disease and you split it into multiple subtypes, it's like when you have the Green Party running against Hillary, and we know where that ended up. So, the CDC has opined as to why hepatitis C is so underappreciated as a cause of morbidity and mortality, and these are their conclusions. The unabated increasing trend in HCV-related deaths underscores the urgency in finding, evaluating, and treating patients in the largest infectious disease epidemic in the United States. I just wanted to sort of end this section with some data that came from New South Wales. And this slide makes the point that when hepatitis C comes into a population, the causes of death are not stable over time. They change over time. So early in the epidemic, most of the deaths are actually related to drug use, at least in this population in New South Wales. Only after 10 years or so do you start seeing liver-related deaths coming up. And by the time they finished their data collection, liver-related deaths were among the leading causes of death in their cohort.
Well, among those, we know among the under 30 crowd with the opioids, that they're not dying of hep C.
Right.
60,000 a year are dying from opioid overdoses.
Right.
Right. They all have hep C.
Right. Yeah, that's what's happening down here. So the deaths from drugs are far more important than deaths from liver when hep C first. Yeah. And let's face it, hep C has always come into people in their 20s and 30s. Yeah.
It's a while to kill you.
Yeah.
Now, do you have the data up that we talked about last week from?
Yes.
From our,
Yes. So,
7,000 favorite pictures.
yep, we have been getting information on about 27,000 patients. And by we, I mean Lily and Punny and Doug and Allison and Max. We're trying to do a big case, Anna, we're doing a big case finding effort. And so far, we have identified out of these 26,000, over 1,000 that look like they died before they ever came to hep C
But
treatment.
actually, it was 1,200 out of the first 6,000 that they looked at. So it's 20%.
I think that's true, but I need to double check with
Yeah, because they've
With
only gotten
Brooke,
through 6,000.
who made it. But I think that Lily used her informatics to go through the records of all 26,000. So it's not just looking at the death records, but yeah, but
she's going through Epic, and a lot of these deaths were found out on phone call because they didn't die here at Mount Sinai.
right.
Majority of them, I think. Right?
I think we don't know, so we're double checking now. It's probably a combination from what we've gleaned from reaching out and then also looking at the entire data set, because she did look at it kind of across the 26,000.
Oh, she did, okay. I misunderstood. I
Yeah.
thought it was the first 6,000.
I think it's a combination, so we have to figure out what the difference is.
It's a lot.
Well, so 20% was astounding.
Yeah, that's what we thought.
Yeah.
And in any case, it's a very large number of people. In terms of a population that you might turn to find insight into what's killing hepatitis C, I'll show you some other mortality data, and this would be a very large sample set. So, as far as we can tell, this NHANES data more or less reflects what the hepatitis C positive population in the United States looks like. And it used to be younger, and now it's getting older.
The ones that are still around.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's certainly a big confusion. Because if you're losing at the rate of 100,000 a year, it's going to shift your demographics really quickly. So this is a study that looked at causes of death in the NHANES HCV population. And they found that so I just noticed that they were only looking at deaths in 527 people, and what they found was a 2.4-fold increase in all-cause mortality and a 1.8-fold increase in cardiovascular mortality. And this was the case even when they adjusted for age, sex, race, education, alcohol, smoking, diabetes, hypertension, albuminuria, and BMI.
That's been a universal number from, dozens of.
I agree with you.
About 3
I
times.
totally agree with you.
3 times.
Yes, and you've also pointed out the cardiovascular risk for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it may be real.
Which is reassuring that they got something right.
Doug. Please. So they estimated that hepatitis C actually reduces life expectancy by 12 years, which is really huge.
That's also universal. 10 to 12 is what dozens of other studies.
So this is a study from the New York City Department of Health where they looked at causes of death in patients with hepatitis B and hepatitis C, and they found that during the period that they looked, which was a 13-year period, 12% of the HCV cases died. And the causes of death are listed here in order, and you'll see that cardiovascular disease is at the top, and non-liver cancers is number 2. Now, similar to the NASH folks, these guys who were basically in the AIDS Institute did something that was interesting. So they took hepatitis C-associated deaths and they split them from liver disease deaths. But if you actually added them together, they would be number 3rd on the list and above AIDS deaths.
And the same thing happens in lots of HIV cohorts where liver disease drops down to like number 4 or 5, but then they have liver cancer as a separate.
Exactly.
Well, hello, isn't that a liver disease? When you add that back in, it goes back up to number 1.
Yeah, no, it's really important when you're looking at data to see if there's something that has happened that has caused fragmentation of the group that you're interested in, and then you have to re-summarize everything. So this is a study that basically looks over time at deaths in patients who have cirrhosis, and what they found is consistently the main cause of death in patients with cirrhosis in the United States is end-stage liver disease, and about 1/3 are dying of liver cancer. So cirrhosis is obviously very important for hepatitis C because now at least 25% of the hepatitis C patients in the United States have cirrhosis. So we want to know what happens to our patients now that we can cure them. And there hasn't been enough time to cure them with DAAs to get follow-up data, so we're still looking for information from the interferon days. And this is really the best published study that I know of where morphometric analysis was done on paired biopsies before and after. The second biopsy was a minimum of 4 years after the SVR and a median of 5 years, and everybody in the study started out with cirrhosis. So what they found was that cirrhosis resolved in 60%, but persisted in 40%, but portal inflammation persisted in well over half. There was no change in sinusoidal capillarization. I think if you can't get your vasculature to be normal liver vasculature, you're never going to have normal liver function. So it was disconcerting that they did not see any change in capillarization after 5 years. And smooth muscle actin, which is a marker of activated myofibroblasts, was completely unchanged.
That's about the same number as the Poignard study from 2002, where he in the earliest days of interferon, we did the same thing. Actually, he had 50%.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Resolution.
Yep, that's right.
So that's reassuring.
If you sum all the studies that have been done that look at it, it comes out to be about that. Very similar. So, just a questionnaire here. So this shows the actual biopsy data. So this is during chronic infection, and this is after hepatitis C cure. And you see that 100% had portal inflammation. During chronic infection, it goes down to 66%. Interestingly, interface hepatitis decreases to a very low level, and lobular inflammation goes to almost zero. So there seems to be something about portal inflammation that we should keep in mind. And this just shows that, yes, although you have a resolution of cirrhosis in 60%, 75% of the patients still had F3 or F4 fibrosis. And honestly, this is probably easier fibrosis to resolve than what we are going to be looking at in the DAA era, where even sicker patients are getting treated. And this shows the results for smooth muscle actin staining, which is completely unchanged over time. So this is a study from analysis of biopsies from patients with NASH. So you're all familiar with the NAS score. So the NAS score looks at ballooning, it looks at lobular inflammation, and it looks at fat. So what this study and others have shown is that none of those histologic features that go into the NAS score actually look like they're associated with outcomes. But something that is associated, at least in univariable analysis, is portal inflammation. So portal inflammation may be important both in our post-SVR patients and in NASH patients. And I think it would be very interesting to know more about what distinguishes portal inflammation from lobular inflammation. So, right off the bat, it's important to keep in mind that the liver has anatomically two separate blood supplies. So you have the portal blood that comes in and fills up the sinusoids, which primarily bathe the hepatocytes. But the biliary tree actually doesn't have portal blood as its main supply. What it's supplied by is the hepatic artery, which branches into a capillary plexus that wraps around the bile duct. So this is all happening in the portal region. So here's a diagram of this from a different angle showing the portal vein, and then you've got bile ducts here, and here you've got the hepatic artery. So also in this region are these portal fibroblasts, which are indicated here in orange. So until quite recently, it was not possible, once these portal fibroblasts become activated and turn into portal myofibroblasts, to distinguish these cells from, example, stellate cells that also can transform into myofibroblasts.
I was going to say, where are Scott's stellate cells?
But this group found that a specific type of collagen, collagen 15 alpha 1, is expressed only by the portal fibroblasts and not by stellate cells. So armed with this marker, it becomes possible for the first time to actually determine if a cell that is involved in laying down collagen in a place that it should not be is derived from a portal fibroblast or from the stellate cell. So what these investigators also showed is that these portal fibroblasts can be activated by injured bile ducts, and when they are stimulated by factors that are secreted by the damaged bile ducts, they become activated and they express collagen 15 alpha 1, and they also express VEGF, which then alters the nature of the surrounding endothelium and causes it to become capillarized. So collagen 15 alpha 1 is a pretty interesting molecule. So a group that was interested in atherosclerosis knocked out expression of collagen 15 alpha 1. And they found that in the transgenic animals, it just knocked out atherosclerotic plaque formation. So their model of what happens is collagen 15 alpha 1 is what we call a non-fibrillar collagen, so it's not really something that's ropey, like the kind of collagen bands that we think of in hepatitis C. But maybe it's more like extracellular matrix sponge that binds cytokines and chemokines and increases their half-life. And this, you could imagine, could have quite a pro-inflammatory effect. And that's what these people found when they did a gene expression study on the same region of the vasculature in animals with and without collagen 15 alpha 1. And what they found was that knocking out this gene knocked out, well, pretty much all the pathways that you would hope to knock out if you're trying to get rid of inflammation. So I think it would be very interesting to learn more about expression of this protein in some of our post-SVR biopsy samples. So one of the additional questions about our patients who've been cured of hepatitis C is what happens to their risk of liver cancer. This has been quite hotly debated. So this is a study that was done in Germany, and they followed patients who were either cured of hepatitis C by DAA treatment or they rounded up a control group of patients. And they found that as far as they followed the patients, they did not see any difference in the incidence of HCC, but they hold out the hope that maybe if they carried their study farther, they would see a reduction over time. It's possible that we will, but this study, which was done during the interferon era and is then a study with longer follow-up, actually found that up to 8 years, there was no decrease in the incidence of HCC in patients who were cured of hepatitis C. So the jury is still out. So one thing that we know happens in the cirrhotic liver is that there are a lot of mutations that accumulate not so much in tumors. I mean, they do accumulate in the tumors, but they also accumulate in non-tumors. And this is a study that examines that phenomenon. And you can imagine that if years of chronic hepatitis C infection have given you a liver that is left behind with lots of mutations and clonal populations, it's not so very surprising that you would continue to see liver cancer developing. So despite all that evidence, there's this study that came out in gastroenterology, which has attracted a tremendous amount of attention, that led to the conclusion, well, among patients treated with DAAs, SVR was associated with a considerable reduction in the risk of HCC. And I think the key here is association. It's true that the people who had an SVR had a lower rate of HCC development than people who had a non-SVR. The problem is it's just not a causal relationship.
Well, the ones who didn't get an SVR may indeed have been sicker.
Exactly.
Right. So,
yes.
Or
so
previously treated, or failures, or
exactly. Yes. Yes. The same things that cause treatment failure are risk factors for cancer. So it's really not surprising if you just take a group and you get the people who cured virus and the people who didn't, that they're going to have a difference in their risk of HCC going forward. So I think that's, plus we have only imperfect methods for detecting HCC, so there's a good chance that some of the HCCs were pre-existing, and we know that having a tiny HCC is a risk factor for treatment failure. So all those things tend to accumulate HCC risk in the non-SVR population. So even if it doesn't make things better from the standpoint of liver cancer risk, there's really no doubt that HCV treatment improves liver function. It doesn't improve liver function 100% of the time, but in most patients it does. So for those patients who either don't get better because they're cured or continue to progress after they're cured. So this is Tom, saying some livers are not coming back. We need to stimulate regeneration. So this is a very recent study, which you might have read about in Science Times this week. That's where I found it, where a group went into the esophagus of people who had absolutely no sign of having any lesions in their esophagus or esophageal cancer or any kind of disease whatsoever. And they cut the tissues into teeny tiny pieces, and then they did deep sequencing looking for mutations. And so these are younger people, and these are middle-aged people, and these are older people. And you can see that at the end of the day, over half of the cells actually had major mutations. So in particular, older donors had notch mutations and P53 mutations in 12 to 80% or 2 to 37% of the cells. And surprisingly, notch 1, which is often associated with esophageal cancer, they found several times higher rate of mutation than they find in cancers themselves. So there's some important messages from here. Apparently, accumulating clonal populations of mutated cells is just a normal part of being alive. Makes a lot of sense. I'm sure liver cancer is much less of a threat to your body than liver failure, right? So if you've got a cell that's got a mutation that gives it some kind of a proliferative advantage, it probably is advantageous to the host in many situations for that cell to be given the go signal and go on and proliferate. And yet, in many cases, although these clonal populations are expanding and they have mutations that we consider to be driver mutations for cancer, they aren't causing cancer in many cases. So this kind of data should stimulate hope in everyone that we could eventually find ways to figure out what we need to do to sustain and stimulate proliferation of these cells that still have a proliferative capacity without having them turn into cancer cells on us.
We were talking to Scott yesterday about future anti-fibrotic mechanisms because the ones that we're using for NASH now are pretty crude.
Very bad, yeah.
So, I mean, what he intimated was that the best possible solution would be to activate the stellate cells to do what they do when they're releasing fibrosis.
Right.
So if you get rid of the fibrosis a natural way,
yes,
and then let the stellate cells do it, just tickle them to go in the right direction to take the fibrosis away, because they do that, obviously. And maybe even some of those Tom's livers that are over the top, past the point of no return, we might be able to get back,
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of things that need to happen. Obviously, you need to get rid of the fibrosis. Somehow you need to get your vasculature back. You've got to get your fenestrated endothelium back, or you're not going to have normal liver function. And you have to have a population of hepatocytes that's healthy enough that they can replace the cells that have lost, or you're not going to have enough albumin. So yeah, we need to get all those things to work together. Then Tom will be happy.
Tom will be out of a job.
No, Tom will never be out of a job. So we need better data about Hep C epidemiology to serve our patients. And in the Sunday Times, there was an editorial about how physicians should actually tell their patients to vote.
We do that.
Good. Coffee chocolate voting. So Hep C patients are at high risk for cardiovascular disease and 2 to 3-fold more likely to die of end-stage liver disease than HCC, but we're going to have to reevaluate the causes of death as we can cure more patients. All of the death data are from patients with chronic infection, not post-cure. We need to find the drivers of portal inflammation and capillarization because this could pave the way for interventions across a range of liver diseases, including NASH. Collagen 15 alpha 1 seems like a possible molecular link between portal inflammation and vascular inflammation and vascular disease. And somatic mutations yield clonal populations in the liver. Research is needed to find ways to stimulate the cells that are capable of healthy proliferation. And thanks. And if you have any questions?
I've been communicating actually on a different level with the Department of Health, other than with New York City and New York State, because I was one of the MSLs told me there's just a huge number of federally qualified health centers in Nassau and Suffolk, with a ton of Hep C patients. None of them were treated, and that's part of their charge, actually, to be treated. The government says that's one of their top 3 diseases.
So why aren't they?
Well, I don't know. So I asked Ann Winters from New York City. I said, "You know the Department of Health people at Nassau and Suffolk, who we could talk to about how many cases there are of Hep C, because they must know."
Yeah.
And she said, "No, they don't know shit."
Oh dear.
She said, "You'd have to ask Colleen at the state level. The state might know a little bit, actually, but the local departments of health outside of New York City, basically. So no departments of health in New York State collect any data or know anything about the Hep C in New York State. And this is probably the best studied state in the country. So you can imagine what it's like, in North Dakota. So she said the state will know. So Colleen is going to look for it.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to figure out, what we could do now that we own South Nassau and have an outpost in Manhasset and one in Comac, to get some of these folks treated. Because she's following like a dozen or more pregnant Hep C patients in Stony Brook, there, where the epidemic is even bigger in Suffolk County, I think, than in Nassau.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the dearth of data is absolutely staggering.
It is. Yeah.
Does the DOC, because we talked about how prison populations aren't included in NHANES.
Oh.
Does the DOC track any of this, or? That's a big.
Basically, they told us that they would arrest us if we asked any more questions along those lines. Honey, do you want to elaborate? I mean, it was pretty much.
They're not in a position to share any data officially. That was the response we actually got. We had a call with Colleen recently from the State Department of Corrections. There is a lot of work being done in both the jail and the correctional facilities to increase capacity around testing and some treatment. The problem in jails is that it's very hard to have a defined time that people will be there, so they are more reticent to start treatment, although there's been a lot of arguments from a lot of folks in academia that this is a perfect scenario in which to do treatment.
Well, our guy from Mass General is there.
Yeah.
Rikers,
So
right?
Justin Chan will be giving a webinar on Tuesday for kind of highlighting where they are.
He's
and
treating
Rikers.
everybody there, and he can get his hands on.
Yeah, and we did hear from the state that in the people who they start, it's a little murky how many patients they start on Hep C treatment through docs, that if a patient does start treatment and they get released early, they make a lot of effort to give them medicines as they're leaving the facility, which I was actually pleased to hear because of that gap in coverage in terms of it takes at least 72 hours to reinstate insurances, even if you have Medicaid. So if they get released like on a Friday, you can imagine they're not going to be getting any movement on getting their Medicaid or insurance reinstated until another week. So, but it's very about like kind of the details of how widespread the testing is. They're not willing to share data on how many people they're testing and how many are positive. I'm hoping to hear more about Rikers on Tuesday when Justin, who's been looking at this data now, he was at Harvard and is now he's an infectious disease doc there, is now working at Rikers.
You went to medical school here, right?
Yes.
Residency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, well, but it's part of the problem is budgetary.
Yes.
Because once you're in prison, the cost of all your medical care, including medicine, comes out of the Department of Corrections budget, not Medicaid, Medicare, or their private health insurance or anything.
So they are
so
trying to
they're
create
getting prices
re-entry
down.
programs where they are coordinating with physicians who, because it's not just Hep C, some of these patients have dialysis. You know, I think one of the Rikers had formed a relationship with some of our primary care docs around Hep C. The first patient that got referred was a patient who had no connection to dialysis, who needed urgent dialysis, so ended up getting sent to the ER. So there needs to be more work about reentry and transition back to care. Going back to your point about Suffolk County, Colleen for years has talked about how there's just not been enough capacity for Hep C treatment in Suffolk County. Ruthie's there now. She's seeing a lot of Hep C patients. She said weekly she's getting referral. A lot of them are young women, some of them pregnant.
Yeah.
Keeping them engaged in care has been tough, she said. A lot of them have ongoing drug use or recent drug use history.
Actually, the Comac site may be a little more helpful because Stony Brook is so far north. You know, it's like 10 miles from the expressway or the the northern states, so it's like way out of the way. Whereas Comac is right close to the major arteries out there, so it's a lot easier. I'm sorry, Tom, you were going to say something.
Just about something different. Great talk, Andrea. Very enlightening as always. So I actually agree with you about the changes in the vascular architecture, the microarchitecture. I mean, we're seeing people who have cirrhosis that can regress when they have follow-up biopsies. I mean, clearly, if they have any degree of portal hypertension, I'm not sure they're going to regress their cirrhosis. I mean, even though we're trying to compare what's going on in Hep C to the Hepatitis B algorithm, where clearly cirrhosis regressed, I'm not actually sure that clinical cirrhosis regressed even in the Hepatitis B patients. So,
You mean in terms of portal hypertension?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm very concerned when patients have portal hypertension that even if we stabilize their disease, they're going to need transplant services ultimately. So I don't know if antifibrotics are going to help those patients. I mean, that's a pessimistic way of looking at things, but I think we need more analysis of what you brought up in terms of the vascular microenvironment.
Yeah, B seems to be way different than C. We've got a couple dozen Hep B patients who had ascites 10 years ago when I first saw them because they were on limidine and resistant to it. Those ascites is gone, they're off diuretics.
But that's true, and we've seen this with Hep C patients on the list, but I think part of this may be
a little doubtful.
I think their inflammation may come down.
It does.
And the Hepatitis B patients have a lot of inflammation, and I just wonder if that's why they clinically got better, but they're not out of the woods yet.
Well, they still get HCC, despite being on effective Hep B treatment. So we're still screening them, and they still get HCC. And actually, even a couple, we had a 74-year-old seroconvert recently, one of those former patients with ascites. I didn't even tell her because I don't want to discuss stopping the medicine. I'm not going to stop. Actually, it's somebody who was that sick at one point. It's like it seems she might just seroconvert, but they still get HCC and they still seroconvert. So it's like, go figure. Hep B has no rules.
So in the closing moments, we have a case conference today, is that right?
Case conference, which is not viral hepatitis.
Okay, and I'm going to make a pitch for everybody who can to come to the Department of Medicine research conferences. They take place in this room once a month. It's the second Wednesday of every month, so we don't conflict with the case conferences. And they're really good. They're from all around Mount Sinai with a focus on people from the Department of Medicine, and the speakers really go out of their way to give very recent data from their labs and also to present it in a way that people who aren't immediately working in their field can understand it. So keep in mind when you see signs up in the hall for the research conferences to come. So
Yeah,
let's
one
just
quick
go.
question to your point. I know that you mentioned there's no data available now from the Department of Corrections, but do we have an idea based on previous data? What is the prevalence?
I
of
think
Hep C?
30 to 40%. But I would say before they offered to arrest us for our questions, they intimated that one of the reasons they don't want to get into it too much is they're afraid what the data will show is that people come in without Hep C and then they get Hep C. And they don't want to have a lot of data out there showing that our prisons are Hep C exchange services. But I think
Incubators.
Studies that have reported the prevalence ranges anywhere from 17 to 80% in various prison and jail populations.
But I think it averages right around 40%.
Probably.
Actually, it's higher in the women. It's closer to 80 in the women.
Rikers consistently on our surveillance reports with the department has the highest.
It's like double. It's like 70, 80 in women and 40, 50 in men.
So it would be a great place to treat. Very humane also.